So picture this. It's the summer of 1945. The war in Europe is finally over, but the whole world is basically holding its breath. Why? Because over in the Pacific, an entire empire is refusing to give up, and it's setting the stage for a terrifying final act, and for a weapon that would change the world forever. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the stalemate that led to this moment. Then we'll get into how they chose the first target, the incredible story of the Hiroshima mission itself, and the unbelievable power that was unleashed. After that, we'll cover the second bombing, Nagasaki, which was really a target of chance. And finally, we'll talk about the shadow these weapons still cast over us today. To really get why these bombs were dropped, you've got to go back to mid-1945. The Allied forces were facing this huge strategic problem. How do you end a war when your enemy absolutely refuses to surrender? It's a pretty stark contrast, right? The war in Europe is done, Germany is in ruins and has surrendered. But on the other side of the planet, Japan is fighting on with this fierce, unbelievable determination that just won't break. And look, the pressure on Japan was just immense. I mean, an absolutely relentless conventional bombing campaign had already flattened huge parts of more than 60 of its cities. And yet, despite all that destruction, Japan's leadership just would not accept defeat. This absolute refusal to surrender is what forced American planners to start seriously considering a drastic and very final option: a brand new top-secret weapon. Okay, so you have this terrifying new weapon. Now the big question is, where do you use it? The process for picking a target was incredibly deliberate. And what's really fascinating is how one of Japan's most famous cities was, believe it or not, spared. You know, when they first started making these secret lists of potential targets, Kyoto was on every single one of them. It was Japan's ancient capital, a city with immense cultural and historical importance. But here's the twist. The U.S. Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, had actually honeymooned there years before, and he insisted it be taken off the list to preserve its heritage. So, with Kyoto off the table, the focus shifted to Hiroshima, a city that was strategically vital, home to a military headquarters, a major industrial center, and critically, it was built on flat terrain that would maximize the bomb's destructive power. Now, this is where things get really clever. The mission itself wasn't just about dropping a bomb, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They used a tactic specifically designed to make the Japanese population ignore the very plane that was about to change their world. So, here's what they did. In the weeks before the main attack, single American B-29 bombers started flying these solo missions over Japan. They'd show up, drop just one conventional bomb, and then they'd fly away. This happened again and again and again. The whole point was to create a pattern, to basically train Japanese air defenses to see a lone B-29 not as a serious threat, but as a minor nuisance, something that wasn't even worth sounding the major alarms for. And the tactic worked perfectly. So when a lone B-29 appeared in the sky over Hiroshima on the morning of August 6th, it was pretty much dismissed as routine. But this plane? This plane wasn't carrying another conventional bomb. This time, it was carrying Little Boy. All right, so the bomb is released, and what happens next is just this incredible race against time, not just for the city about to be hit, but for the flight crew who had to escape the very power they had just unleashed. Just think about that. 45 seconds. From the moment the bomb left the plane to the moment it detonated. And for the crews on those 3 B-29s, well, that was their window. They had exactly 45 seconds to turn their planes and fly as fast and as far away as they possibly could. And here's something you might not realize. The bomb was never meant to hit the ground. Nope, it was specifically designed to explode 580 meters above the city. This is called an airburst, and it was calculated to create the biggest possible destructive radius, spreading that blast wave over the widest possible area. The moment it went off, the temperature at ground zero hit an estimated 7,000 degrees Celsius. I mean, it's almost impossible to even imagine that kind of heat. In an instant, everything within a 1-mile radius, buildings, animals, people, was just vaporized, gone. Can you imagine being one of those pilots and looking back? What they saw was something no human had ever seen before, a terrifying column of fire and debris forming a mushroom cloud that stretched 12 kilometers straight up into the sky. They said the shockwaves were so powerful they rattled their planes, like they were caught in an earthquake in the middle of the air. Now, After a cataclysm like that, you'd think the war would be over, right? A city wiped off the map by a single bomb. But it wasn't. Japan still refused to surrender, and that tragically led to a second mission just 3 days later, a mission that didn't go at all according to plan. And that leads to the big question, doesn't it? After a city was literally erased by a weapon of unprecedented power, why in the world was a second bomb used? Well, the simple, shocking answer is that in the days after Hiroshima, the Japanese government remained silent. Their refusal to surrender is what prompted the second attack. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's incredibly fast. August 6, Hiroshima is destroyed. Then, for 2 full days, the world just waits. And when no surrender comes, the order is given. On August 9th, another B-29 took off, this time carrying a different, more powerful plutonium bomb nicknamed Fat Man. But this second mission, it was almost a disaster from the start. The primary target was supposed to be the city of Kokura. But when the plane got there, the ground was totally covered by smoke and bad weather. For 45 agonizing minutes, the pilots circled, trying to get a clear view of their target, but they just couldn't. They were running low on fuel. They had to make a decision right then and there. So they diverted to their secondary target, Nagasaki. And honestly, it was far from an ideal choice. The city's hilly terrain would actually contain and limit the bomb's blast. The attack on Nagasaki wasn't really a strategic choice. It was a last-ditch decision born of pure necessity. So that brings us to the aftermath, to the staggering human cost of these 2 attacks, and to the legacy of a technology that the world, once it was learned, could never unlearn. The number of people who died almost immediately, it's just hard to wrap your head around. Across both cities, it's estimated that somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 people were killed in those initial blasts and the firestorms that followed. And for the people who survived that first moment, the horror was far from over. They suffered from this terrifying new thing called radiation sickness. In the years that followed, they faced much higher rates of cancer. These survivors, known as hibakusha in Japan, which translates to explosion-affected people, had to live with not just severe burns and lifelong health problems, but also a lasting and painful social stigma. There is one eyewitness account that, for me, just captures the absolute totality of the destruction. Someone who was there said, "Birds died while flying in the air." Just let that sink in. It wasn't just buildings or people. The very ecosystem, life itself, was extinguished in an instant. The heat just erased everything. And this all leaves us with one final, very sobering thought. The bombs dropped on Japan, the ones that caused all this devastation, were the very first of their kind. They were products of 1940s technology. So it really makes you wonder, right? If that's what atomic weapons could do nearly 80 years ago, what are today's far more advanced arsenals capable of?